Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to a GRE free prep hour. My name's Logan. Whether you're joining here in person or whether you are watching later on YouTube, I'm glad you're watching. If you're here in person, you should be able to chat in questions. Let me just make sure that that is enabled. Am I allowed to do that? Anyway, as I look for this, let me tell you all a little bit about me and a little bit about what we're going to do tonight. Tonight, we are going to be talking about the GRE essays. So in this series, if you've never seen it before, I encourage you to go check out on YouTube. We have over 100 of these posted. Every month we do one or two of these and we talk about a new part of the GRE, but I found that there is one part that we have been overlooking for too long, which is the essays. We have not done a prep hour about the GRE essays in almost 4 years, even though it is one of 3 parts of your test that is graded. What we're going to do tonight is I'm going to do a little bit of an intro and overview of the essays. What are the essays on the GRE? What are the GRE essay graders really looking for? And then we're actually going to practice sort of brainstorming. Because one of the key skills, one of the most practicable skills of the essay is that first 5 to 7 minutes that you're actually brainstorming everything that you're going to say. So where is that thing that I was looking for? Allow panelists, attendees. I think you may only be able to chat through the Q&A feature. So if you see that out there, you can send me any questions that way as we're going through. And I'm just going to jump into this and talk about the essays. So hopefully this part only takes 20 minutes or so, going through just talking about the basic facts that you need to know about the GRE essays. And then we'll be able to use kind of the full later half of our hour tonight, actually trying the brainstorming and outlining part of the essays. Okay. First, I'm just going to give you the facts. You might know this already if you've been studying for the GRE, but if you haven't, then this is going to be new. And first off, what I have on the screen here is basically a map of what the GRE is in that sort of time order. You start with the essays. And then you have 5 of these quant or verbal sections. The quant or verbal could come in any order. You have at least 2 of each that are graded. And there is a break in the middle. Put it all together, it's about 4 hours. It is a long marathon of a test, but it is always true that the first hour is the essays. And that's one reason why I think the essays are a really important part of the test, even though for some students and some schools, the essay score is a little bit less important. For some schools, it is important. And no matter who you are, it's going to affect your emotional mood while you take the rest of the test, because you've just devoted an hour's worth of work to writing these essays. If the essays are bad, you're going to feel bad when you start the rest of the test. So you want to sort of put your best foot forward. So other things to know, the essays are always first, like I mentioned. They're 30 minutes each. So up here we have 2 essays for 60 minutes. They're back to back, but they're broken into 2 and you cannot roll over your time. It's 2 separate chunks of 30 minutes. The first one is analyze an issue. And on that, you are picking a side. The GRE is going to sort of tell you an issue and you're going to pick, do you agree or do you disagree in most cases? Then the second one is always analyzing an argument. And in this one, that's wrong. That says the same thing. Let me cover that up and write what it really is, which is that you're going to sort of, you're going to dissect a bad argument that the GRE makes. So they're going to sort of say something like, here's the pitch by the town mayor of why we need to build a new stadium. And it might be very bad reasoning of why this town wants to build a new stadium. And you're going to sort of analyze what are the flaws and how could this argument maybe be better. The important thing to know about scoring is that it is scored completely separately from quant and verbal. And it is true that many test takers, they're mainly focused on these two scores. I think that's why the essay sometimes gets the short end of the stick. But the essay score itself is from 0 to 6. It could be scored in half points, so you might get a 3.5, a 5.5, something like that. Let's talk about that score a little more. So if you are wondering, hey, how much should I care about the essay myself? You might want to look up the programs you're applying to and see what they think about the essay. Different schools value it differently. But here is like basically the percentile chart that shows how difficult it is to get each score. The things I want you to notice are, it is notoriously hard to get a perfect 6. That's a 99th percentile essay. I've never gotten that. But a 4 is a lot of times what schools will say they're looking for if they're looking for a certain essay score is a 4 or better. And a 4 is a 60th percentile, which means 40% of people get a 4 or better. So you can sort of make that your aim if you are looking for really nice essay score would be a 4 or better. There we go. So what I'm going to get into next is like, well, how do they come up with that score? How do they actually grade you? One little thing to know is that the test is technically, or the essay is technically graded by a human and a computer. The human always gets a final say, because if the human and the computer disagree, it goes to a second human, and they sort of cast the final vote about what your score is. The computer is just there to sort of make sure that there is consistency across all the grading, and that there's not one really mean grader and one really nice grader. So it's actually there. Even though it's a little weird to have like basically an AI being part of grading your essay, it's there to basically prevent bias. Well, what is a human and the computer looking for? Substance, style, and length. Substance is the most important. Let me just fill up this whole thing. Oops. And let's go one thing at a time. First, they're looking that you answer the prompt and that you follow directions. As we will see tonight, each essay has sort of different instructions, not only a different prompt, but then slightly different instructions. And you need to address whatever it is they tell you to do in the instructions. You need to make points that make sense and that stay on topic. If you start saying things that are really too much of a logical leap, or that really go off and start talking about something that you weren't even asked about, those are the kind of things that might dock you some points. And here's the GRE's actual words about why they have an essay section. This is what the GRE says. They want to see that you can articulate and support complex ideas, construct and evaluate arguments, and sustain a focused and coherent discussion. So those sort of 3 things, I'm going to say, try to do those things when you write. By complex ideas, a nice way you can do that is by like exploring subtlety in your essay. Pick a side strongly so that they know you sort of have some conviction, but think about how the answer might differ depending on sort of different scenarios. Make sure, like I said, you stay on topic. That's kind of the focused and coherent part. And then you are really making an argument. So they want to make sure that not only is what you're saying makes sense, but it actually leads to a certain conclusion. Style does matter. They do like it when you use a variety of vocabulary and a variety of sentence structures. So that means, mixing up your phrasings a little bit, not just using a bunch of short, sort of boring sounding sentences. And they do count grammar and spelling some, but it's not a big part of the score. Even a perfect score is still possible, even if you have some typos and maybe a grammar mistake in there. If you start to have lots of typos and lots of grammar mistakes, that's when it becomes an issue. But they are a little bit forgiving, knowing that you are really on the clock as you write these things. And then length does matter some. They prefer longer essays than shorter essays, over shorter essays. They also prefer good essays, so it's better to write a good essay than to write a long essay that is bad. But one of the things you might try to practice as you practice the essay over your study process is making sure you can hit this mark. Writing 4 to 5 paragraphs with like 5+ sentences in at least most of those paragraphs. If you do that, you'll be getting into the range of like several hundred words, which is what they tend to be looking for. Personally, I never have any idea how many words I've written though, so I always think of it not in a word count, but in a paragraph and sentence count, because they don't really show you a word count on the screen. So you really have no idea. So that's what they are grading on. And let's go ahead on to actually looking at an example of each type. Just take a quick 30 seconds to a minute, and I want you to read this. You'll notice that there's an issue itself and there's directions. So read both. Okay. I do believe everyone here that is live can chat. Welcome to those of you who are here. I'm going to ask you all, put it in the chat. And if you ever want to chat to just me, you can make it say hosts and panelists. If you want to chat to everyone, you can say everyone. Tell me in the chat, gut feeling after just reading this, do you think you're going to agree or disagree in your essay? And maybe what's like 1 or 2 reasons why you might agree or disagree? Tell me in the chat. I have at least one disagree out there. And one thing that I'll emphasize as y'all write, I would love to hear from everybody, is there's no right answer. It's pretty much always going to be agree or disagree. And they are set up in a way where it doesn't matter if you choose agree or disagree, you should be able to get a good grade either way. They should be defensible arguments on both sides. Here they're asking, is the best way to study world history by reading original texts in both the language, basically, of the student and a foreign language. And a note in the chat I got from Daniela is basically disagree because under this expectation, someone would have to study foreign language before studying history, and maybe you might elaborate and say that will go on to sort of create extra restrictions to studying history, and it would mean some students never get to study these world history texts. I think that could be the beginning of a good essay. Someone could come up with the flip side and say, I actually agree with this because I interpret the phrase best way as like the ideal way for students to study. And if we could get students to speak these languages, then they're going to learn the most if they can really analyze this in the native language as well. That could also lead to a good essay. So there's always several reasons you can come up with on both sides. And they're often going to say something like this. This is an example of what I mentioned earlier of making sure you follow the instructions. You're going to want to really jump in. I agree, and here's why. But do spend at least a little bit of time addressing the other side so that they can really see you can understand both sides of this possible issue. let's look at the other type, which is the argument essay. So here's an example of an argument essay prompt. Again, you'll take a minute or so and read this, both the top argument and the directions. So let me know in the chat, anybody out there. Got a few folks here. Welcome, and thanks all of you for joining. What is one question you might talk about? They phrase the instructions as discuss what questions would need to be answered in order to determine whether the argument is reasonable. Tell me in the chat one question you might think of. I see one there in the chat. Sorry if the screen disappeared there for a minute. I accidentally closed my little PowerPoint window. How far are you traveling? That's one of the questions. And I could see this applying both to like basically the data that was collected, or about the sort of conclusion, maybe different distances are safer in different vehicles. Like I could imagine that maybe driving is safer if you're only traveling short distances, but over long distances, you increase your chance enough of having a wreck. Or even the opposite. I think most car accidents happen in parking lots or something like that. So it might actually be safer, if you're doing longer trips at a time. Either way, yeah, the length of travel is relevant maybe to answering this question of which is safer. Another similar thing might be just how many people are doing this. So I might also say how many driving versus flying trips were taken, because that might tell me like the percentage chance of having a death in these accidents. These are the type of questions that you're often going to be asking. And I said before, the arguments are usually bad. I think it might be true that flying is safer than driving. That might be true. But I also think the reasons they gave need a little bit extra help. So it's not always that the conclusion it's bad. It's usually that the reasoning that they've provided is insufficient. And your job is to figure out how is it insufficient? And what are some questions like this that we might need to think about? The instructions here are not always phrased in this exact way, but it's always similar. Hey, what do we need to consider in order to evaluate this argument? So we've sort of seen an example of each. And let me talk about next, like what the format is of the essay you might write. And I'll also talk about just like some of the rules, the guidelines for writing GRE essays. You're always, for both essay types, going to want to start with an introduction paragraph where you basically state your position or your thesis. So if anyone here or anyone watching, remembers or has ever written like English essays, your teacher was probably saying, have a thesis, which means have a stance, have a position that you're trying to prove. So it might be in the issue essay, I agree for these main reasons. And it might be in the argument essay, the argument is flawed for these main reasons. So you start to explain your reasoning there. But you mainly say what you're going to say and explain your reasoning in 2 or 3 body paragraphs, we would call them. So basically, a paragraph each for each main point you have. And then within the paragraph, you sort of elaborate onto the details of the sort of effects that might happen because of this overall point you have. You close it out with a conclusion. The conclusion on the GRE essay can be pretty brief. You don't need to really do anything fancy. You know, you could have a nice, elegant ending if you want, but as long as you kind of recap and sort of summarize your big points so that your reader sort of feels like you stuck the landing and you got to what you were trying to prove. As long as you do that briefly, that is probably going to be a solid conclusion, GRE conclusion. One other tip here is that it's often a good idea to have one paragraph about the opposing side, sort of the twist, like explaining why some people might disagree. Because so many, at least this is for the issue essay. There's less of this in the argument essay. But in that issue essay, the agree or disagree, I think it's a great formula to basically have 2 paragraphs explaining your 2 big points. 1 paragraph about the opposing side, but it's not where you suddenly change your mind. Don't change your mind, but acknowledge that there might be some valid reasons, valid benefits of the other side. Acknowledge that there could even be certain instances where the other side might hold true, and then bring it back to explain why, even though those other points could have some validity, you still liked your side better. So explain some positives of the other side, but still land on your side and say why you like it better. And what that really does for the GRE graders is they can see that you're looking at the issue complexly, you're willing and able to consider both sides, but you're still gonna be confident enough to pick your side. So the last thing to do before we really get into trying this brainstorming is to talk about how to use your 30 minutes. 30 minutes is tough to write these essays. In a certain sense, it's good they don't give you more time because that would just be more work, but it is also, it's challenging to finish everything you want to say in 30 minutes. I'm a pretty fast typer, and I still really struggle to finish what I want to say in these 30 minutes. So how do you make best use of them? The first 5 minutes or so, you are going to want to brainstorm and begin outlining. And then I'll add a couple minutes for outlining as well. But it's really these first 5 to 7 minutes that are key for thinking about which, basically, what do you want to say? If it's an agree or disagree, like which side do you want to pick? And then writing down what are your main points going to be. So basically, in this first 5 to 7 minutes, you want to consider both sides, pick your side, and outline the main point of each paragraph that you're going to write. What this really does is it sets you up for success the rest of the way. And it makes sure, like I said, that you at least kind of stick the landing and get to the conclusion you want to get to. If you don't do this and you just start writing willy-nilly, what might happen? You might get to 28 minutes in and you realize you're only halfway through what you wanted to say because you didn't really block it out beforehand. And then what happens then is you might accidentally end your essay like halfway through. You might have tons of errors compared to if you went a little bit more, you know, at a more steady pace, and it's going to damage your score. After you do your brainstorming and outlining, you know, you're going to use 20 minutes or so at just writing the thing. And If you get really good at brainstorming and outlining, you might be able to do it in a few minutes and then buy yourself more like 25 minutes or so to write. And it is best to save a couple minutes to reread what you wrote and make little tweaks if you realize something you want to say better. Make little proofreading fixes so that you don't have as many grammar spelling errors. If you don't save those extra minutes at the end, again, you're running a little bit of a risk. So a couple last points that I just haven't found a place to bring up so far before we get into actually trying these things. It's not a research paper. So you're not really going to be judged on like the amazing facts that you have. You know, you're not going to know anything about these topics until you sit down. You should be able to answer them even if you don't really have much real world expertise in the subject. So what does that mean is it forces you into writing things that are more about sort of theory, more about what would logically lead from one thing to the next. And some GRE teachers will even say, hey, you can make stuff up. And that is kind of true. For example, you could make up an anecdote about someone you know. If this fake anecdote would really support your story, there's nothing technically stopping you from doing that. They're not necessarily going to like take away any points if you use an anecdote. But you do just need to be careful. Like you still want to make sure your essay makes sense. It's not too anecdotal, and you're not just like making up fake scientific, proofs for what you're saying when those don't really exist. So it is true that you don't need to rely on real world scientific or historical or research facts, but I still wouldn't encourage you to go too wild like making stuff up. Practice the essays with a full practice test. I think that's the best way to do it. Because again, one of the most important parts of the essay is how it leads into the rest of the test and how it just makes the experience longer and tougher. So it's good for you to simulate that before you go sit down and do the real thing. And then the last tip, and I'm about to show you some of it, is there are great resources on the GRE site. The GRE website, it's actually ets.org. ETS is, or ets.com, I forget which. ETS is the company that produces the GRE. And on their website, they have a lot of information about the essay where they tell you what they're looking for. And they tell you they show you a couple other pretty helpful things, such as these. You can download these sample tasks with sample essays of certain scores. So they give you here, I'm in the issue one. They have the same thing for the argument one. You'll find these if you go to the ETS website. Here's a prompt. They tell you some strategies that you might want to employ if you were answering this prompt. So this can help you sort of get in the mind of the test writers. And then they actually have sample essays of every score, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. I just want you to read this, not read, but look at this 6, and you'll kind of see why it's so hard to get a 6, because this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 paragraphs, and a couple of those paragraphs are pretty dang long. It's very hard to write this much at a high level on the test, and that's why it's really hard to get a 6. But if we come down to the 5, we start to see something that really resembles the classic sort of 5-paragraph essay format. An intro where they kind of explain their main theme and begin to explain why they think that. One big body paragraph, a second big body paragraph, and then we're not going to read this whole essay, but this one's a little more of like a conclusion, sort of philosophizing about the issue a little more broadly. Same thing on the 4. 1, 2, 3, 4 paragraphs. So you can see how the length for like a 4 and a 5 is quite reasonable, but the 6 is notoriously tough. Doesn't mean you need to write exactly this length to get a 6, but it just gives you a sample of what they're looking for. They do also have this commentary for each score. So they will not only can you read and just sort of get a vibe of what essay will get what score, but they'll actually analyze for you why this essay got the score that it did, and for the lower scores, why it lost points. The same resource is available for the argument task right here. Got a 6, got a 5, and so on. And I'll just show you. This is pretty much what you have to do to get a 1. It's very hard to get a 1. You pretty much have to not try. And a 2, if you got into this essay on either one, the 2 is longer, but if you read these, you'll see that they kind of drift off topic. They don't always answer the prompts. They almost sometimes feel more like bullet points and less like essays. Let's talk about the best resource they offer, though, at least for practicing, which is the pool of issue topics and the pool of argument topics. What this means is you can download the whole list of all the possible essay prompts you might get, every single one. It's like the essay section is open book in that you can study for it beforehand. But don't study for it too much, because look how long it goes. There's hundreds. Scrolling. We've got to go to power scroll mode over here. You can see it's 38 pages of prompts. So there's no way that you're going to prepare for every prompt. But what this does is it gives you a full real GRE set of resources that you can prepare for. Same thing again is over here in the argument. And what we are going to do in the next 30 minutes is we're just going to pick one at random from these two. And I'm going to ask you all to sort of do a 5-minute brainstorm. And I'm going to do one as well, sort of quietly while you do that. And then when the sort of 5 minutes are up, we're going to compare notes. And I'm going to write on the board here my outline of what I might want to write. And if any of you submit anything for your outlines, I'll comment on those. So someone in the chat give me a random number from 1 to 38. This is how we'll determine our essay prompt. 17 from Khadija, thank you. So we're going to go to the first prompt on page 17. Okay. Actually, hold on. Maybe not the first. I don't know if I like this one. I'm going to look over a few of these. Oh, and by the way, you'll notice there are so many essay prompts about educators. Oh, I think this is a kind of juicy one. Nice debate to be had here. The primary goal of technological advancements should be to increase people's efficiency so they have more leisure time. That is our prompt. Let me zoom in even a little more. Here we go. Primary goal of technological advancement is should be to increase people's efficiency so they have more leisure time. And then there's the full instructions that y'all should read before we brainstorm. And I'm going to put a 5-minute timer up. I don't have a great way of putting it on the screen with this right now, so I'll just give a warning when there's 1 minute left. Here's a 5-minute timer, and I want y'all to write down on a piece of paper or on something on your computer sort of what you think your agree or disagree would be and your main reasons why, and maybe even start to outline what each paragraph would be. Try it out, and we'll talk in 5 minutes. think one or two people may have just joined us. We are brainstorming what we would write in response to this essay prompt. So if you're just joining us, we have about a little less than 3 minutes left on a task of brainstorming. Would you agree or disagree here? And what else would you want to say for each of your main paragraphs? About 1 minute left, a little less, and then we'll talk. Hey, that was about 5 minutes. So a little bit more, but though a little bit less if you stopped to listen to me when I was blabbing in the middle. So this would be about the amount of time where you would want to be saying, okay, I know what I'm going to write. And I know I'm beginning to understand the main things that I'm going to write about. And I've maybe even started to write my sort of topic sentences for each paragraph or my thesis sentence, or at least I kind of know the topics of my paragraphs. I would love to hear from y'all in the chat. You can send it to just me if you like. That's the host and panelists option. Or you can send it to everyone. What is your take? Agree or disagree? And what's one or two reasons why? What did you come up with during that outline? And I'm going to share mine eventually, but I want to hear y'all's first, if anyone's willing to share. Okay, we got a couple agrees. Do we have any disagrees out there? I'm going to start just jotting down some of the reasons that came in. And then what we're going to do is kind of analyze each of these reasons. Okay, We do have at least one disagree. These are the things coming in from the chat that I'm copying up here. Okay. Good examples, definitely on both sides. Okay, so we have some agrees, some disagrees, and some reasons on both sides. I like everything that's up here, though I think some of these, maybe even many of these are in the category of these are great examples to bring up. I think this one over here is talking about how, like, yeah, navigation technology is a good example of technology that is saving people time. You know, with GPS, you can always get somewhere the fastest way. Payment systems definitely have gotten more streamlined, right? You know, using credit cards compared to cash, using paying on your phone is very convenient, saves time. And, you know, tasks at work can be completed faster as well. And these are all definitely benefits of technological advancement. But what I think what we need to add to these in order to make sort of a great container almost for an essay, these are great things to put in the container, is we need to figure out, is that the primary goal of technological advancement? So something I encourage y'all to do when you see an essay prompt is try to find like the key like sort of conclusion of the stance or of the argument. And whether you agree or disagree, I think what you really got to reckon with answering with this essay is, well, should technological advancement be the primary goal? These are all great examples of why technological advancement does increase efficiency, does increase leisure time, and also of, I think if you elaborated these, you'd have great examples of why increasing leisure time is good for life, why it is a good goal to be increasing leisure time, and why these improvements have been, you know, positives for society. But we haven't totally figured out, just by saying that, whether or not that goal is better than other ones. So that would be my sort of next level for evolving these good points over here. Over here on the disagree side, we got a couple points that folks sent in. I think this one is about how it might actually not be super efficient to use technology to increase efficiency because everything's always changing. I think this was about how the technology would always have to learn how to do things. Or I actually am not sure whether this was people or no, you know what, now that I think about it, I think this is saying that people are always going to have to learn new technology, so technology may not be as good as it seems. Same here. Not everyone is tech savvy, so if new technology is the way that we are sort of increasing leisure time, that might be great for some people, but it might not work for other people. It might even, if you elaborated this point, it might lead to saying that it could even be unfair. Some people get more leisure time from technological advancements than others. And I think I feel similarly about these. These are great points to bring up. Though I think my one challenge that I would push back on this one is these points, I think they're about like, they kind of interpret this prompt as if people were using the technology in order to achieve their leisure time, which could be true. It does say increase people's efficiency, But take something like a computer. It certainly increases my efficiency, but I don't know everything about how my computer works. And over time, you might even say that people gradually learn new technologies. And so even less tech savvy people can adapt to technologies that came around before them. But still good points to bring up here. What I'm going to do in now is bring in kind of what I typed up. And I think the stuff that's up here could be a great start to the essay. And just because I happen to write disagree does not mean, again, that disagree was the automatically right move. But I want to show, I'm not getting the right thing, what I did and how I sort of tried to connect it into that primary goal. Okay, let me make this smaller. Again, there's no guarantee this would lead to a perfect essay. Both sides can work, but I want to show some things about how I think I've set myself up for success with these points here. I wrote, I disagree. And by the way, when y'all are stating your thesis, it's totally okay to rephrase using a lot of the same language as the prompt and just say, I disagree that the primary goal of technological advancement should be to increase people's efficiency. The main thing that I wrote, or the thing I wanted to focus my essay on, is I wanted to really attack this primary goal statement. So I wanted to focus on how, well, there might be other needs that technology should finish first. And I thought of, well, maybe public health, like, curing diseases, pandemic response, as we saw, which was a scientific challenge in the last few years, hunger type things, and then climate. We know about climate change. And that's certainly a technological challenge as well with regard to like energy and, finding ways to save the climate. So I thought, okay, maybe I can say that even though leisure time is a good goal, it doesn't need to be the primary goal. And then I wanted to also say that even if, let's say, we're talking about leisure time itself, people with more leisure time may or may not actually be happier. They might have lots of free time, but not know what to do with it. They might have lots of free time, but still be depressed or anxious or struggling to find purpose, or any number of reasons why people might not necessarily have a better life, even if they have more free time. Even though I think on average, people with more free time will probably find positive things to do, I thought I might be able to come up with a few points about how if technological advancement is working on like meeting individual people's sort of social needs and happiness needs like leisure time, maybe we should be more broad and say, let's not just give more leisure time, let's try to find ways to give people happiness and fulfillment. And then this down here is kind of what I was thinking for like a twist paragraph of that increasing efficiency is a very good goal for tech to serve. And getting more leisure time is a very good goal for tech to serve. So that maybe in the future, once we've tackled other things, or maybe even in certain societies where they have good status on some of these issues I brought up in point 1, that they could make leisure time more of a primary issue. That's what I came up with in the 5 minutes. But I want to stress that I could have come up with the opposite agree and had come up with a great essay as well. What I like about this one is, like I said, the fact that it attacks the sort of extreme language of the primary goal. One of the big skills on GRE verbal, the verbal sections, is finding and being sensitive to overly extreme language. And you can kind of do the same thing in the essay prompt to find ways to sort of prove or disprove things. Okay, we don't have that much time, only about 10 minutes. So I want to hop over to the argument essay to at least look at one. But any questions for y'all here in person in the chat about sort of the points I came up with, any critiques you think that I should think about before I went off and theoretically wrote this, or questions about why I came up with the points I did? What these 2 points were for me was they were kind of like a bucket. They were buckets where I could take a bunch of my small points, a bunch of my small examples I wanted to use to disagree, and kind of put them in a category. The first category being, hey, there are other needs too. The second category being, hey, there might even be other things better for people than leisure time. Think about that idea of sort of buckets when you try an argument. And this time I actually know which argument I want to go to. It's the argument I got the last time I took the GRE. And I think that it's a pretty bad argument, which means there's lots to find about it. Here it is. So just take 3 minutes or so this time. I want you to read it. And you don't need to think about an entire outline, but think about, again, what is one question that would need to be answered? Oh, and yes, in the chat, someone said, so the main difference between my points and the points that y'all had given is that my point is more of points and the others are examples. I think that's a good summary. Yeah, you want to be careful that your essay in the issue is not just a list of an example, that you really kind of have a thrust, something you're trying to prove, and that your examples support that. Okay, we're short on time, sorry about that. But yeah, read this and just let me know one question that you think we need to answer. Once you have a question in mind, or even just a flaw you've spotted in the argument, pop it in the chat. I'm gonna bring some up to the board. Yeah, well, one of the first question is, are all these people executives? They only apparently surveyed executives, right? They only surveyed executives, but then they made a claim about other stuff. So they surveyed executives, and then they made a recommendation about new hires, right? New hires. So y'all are bringing up some great points in there. I think the first one, here, I had put a few up here to start us off, and y'all have already submitted some similar to this. One related to like the difference between executives and new hires. I would immediately say, wait, do new hires need the same amount of sleep as executives? And then there's the fact that this was only advertising executives, and they made a recommendation for other companies. So these are kind of both in a certain category that I would kind of call, we kind of have we have a conclusion that strays too far from the data. Like basically we have data about one type of thing, and then we're applying a conclusion to something else. Someone mentioned in the chat, there's no evidence the authenticity can be questioned. And yeah, I kind of had a similar thought. Is this evidence even good? Maybe these executives were incentivized to, say that they didn't sleep much. I see a great one from Khadija in the chat. What's the lifestyle of the employees outside work? Are these employees, just expanding on that, are they successful in the long term? Maybe they're successful in the short term because they're really working a super hard burst. Are they, well, I guess I'll stop there and say this is kind of like another sort of bucket you might call of factors that weren't considered, right? There's sort of a little bit of a flaw here that we didn't even consider. Are these people happy? Are they having a lot of burnout, etc.? What you want to do in this essay, the sort of argument-based essay, is try to find the flaws like we just found, and try to put a few flaws into like a category. So like the blue that I have on the screen will kind of be maybe a category. You could write an essay about, you could write a paragraph about flaws in the evidence. Maybe the people were incentivized to report less sleep. Maybe they, were just not sleeping in that time, but they slept a lot other times. There's all sorts of reason to question the original evidence. You could write a paragraph that takes the original data set and finds all the reasons why it doesn't really apply to the final conclusion. You could write a paragraph that lists all the other things that maybe we should be asking about these employees and the rest of their lives, and make a paragraph out of that. We could keep going because there's even more flaws in this argument. But what I encourage you to do in these essays is try to find the flaws or questions and try to put them in buckets like we did here. Pick the first 2 or 3 buckets that you can come up with where you have like a couple of similar questions, and make those your main paragraphs. And by the way, in the argument essays, your thesis, your sort of claim, will always be similar to this argument is flawed, or this argument has many questions to answer, something like that. They have to give you a flawed argument because you have to have things to pick apart. So nice job sort of rapid firing those questions. I'm sorry we don't have more time to do this one in a little bit more depth. But the good news is, like I said, you can go on the GRE website and just find the entire stack of these, do dozens and dozens of these little brainstorming exercises. And what I encourage you to do is to try the brainstorming several times, just to sort of get a hang of. It's a little bit of a unique skill to be like rapid firing from your head examples that support these ideas. It's not something we usually do about something that we don't care about or know about until the moment we see it. So practice the brainstorming. Do maybe in half an hour, try to brainstorm 5 or 6 topics. And then also, again, make sure you actually do practice writing the essay, especially in full length practice tests. Even if you don't care that much about your score, do the essays at least a couple times with your practice test so that you get used to that full 4-hour runtime with the mentally draining task of writing for an hour at the beginning. All right, thanks, y'all. That was our free prep hour about the essay. Hope it helps, and definitely check out on YouTube, those of you who are here live, the rest of the series. If you're on YouTube right now, you already know about the series because you're here watching it. So just go to the playlist and watch even more. We have so many, and you can find one about pretty much every topic on the GRE. Thanks, y'all. Have a good night. Good luck studying.